Good morning, everyone. This morning I want to talk a little bit about a 10-year digital horizon for our schools. But firstly, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners on the various lands on which we meet, pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to the living cultures of our First Nations people. And also to welcome any Aboriginal people who may be with us today. What does a 10-year horizon look like? Will we have a hologram of teachers being beamed into a student's home? Will students be beamed as holograms into the classroom? Will teachers have digital assistants to help them in the classroom? Will we be using a combination of biometrics and artificial intelligence to understand how a student may be feeling in the classroom? The reality is we don't really know. We don't know what this will look like in 5 years, much less 10 years. If we think of the example of the iPad was first released in 2010. By 2019, there were 425 million iPads in the world. Some of the technologies I've mentioned already have been around for quite some time. Machine learning and artificial intelligence have been around since the 1950s, with the term artificial intelligence first coined in 1956. Biometrics in the form of fingerprints were first used in 1960s, with the first hand recognition system released in the 1970s. Virtual reality was first created in 1968 and first released for gaming in the 1990s. And gamification as a term was first coined in 2002, obviously first used for gaming, but now being used for mainstream purposes since about 2010, 2011. We are using gamification in education. In Victorian government schools, Minecraft education is being used in the classroom. Whatever the future may look like, what we do know is that the scale and pace of change has increased exponentially, and our students and our teachers need to be adaptable and resilient to change. Let's have a look at what some of the analysts say. Gartner predicts, looking at the technology and business trends in higher education, talks about student experience, sustainability, scaling the change, the new normal. In K-12, the education trends for 2021, acknowledging that the impact of the pandemic will be felt for some time yet, but also that the opportunities that may have been realised during the pandemic will also be there. In early childhood, there's a considerable amount of research into the use of technology in early childhood education, with most of the researchers saying that there is a place for technology in early childhood education, but that screen time, for example, should be limited to 1 hour a day for very young children. McKinsey has done some research on when classes went online as a response to the pandemic. What was the average effectiveness of remote learning? Interestingly, Australia was one of the more effective countries. And also that teachers reported that students were on average 2 months behind where they usually would have been by November 2020. Conversely, students are saying, 70% of students are saying, in some research done by the local researcher McKindle, that hybrid learning they see as the ideal learning situation for the future. When did we first introduce digital into the classroom? Was it the digital education revolution, the federal government initiative of 2008? This provided laptops for all government high school students. It aimed to provide high-speed broadband to all schools, increased ICT proficiency for teachers and students, projects and research to assist in the use of ICT in learning, to enable parents to participate more in their child's education through the introduction of online learning, and also online access to information for parents, and also the appropriate support mechanisms for schools. Was this successful? Certainly, these are some of the fundamental elements needed to support digital in the classroom. But we could question whether a laptop for a high school student is of any benefit if they don't have connectivity. High-speed broadband for all schools is being achieved, and all jurisdictions around Australia have increasing broadband exponentially in our schools. However, as we have learned during COVID, school is not the only place where students learn. We really do need to have high-speed broadband in all homes. Are our teachers and students proficient right across the system in delivering digital pedagogy, learning in a digital environment? What does the research tell us about how successful the use of digital is in achieving student outcomes? Are all parents able to participate in their child's education through online means? If we think of parents who have English as a second language or who may not speak English, do we offer them the opportunity to participate in their child's education? And do we have the appropriate support mechanisms for schools? I want to talk a little bit now about a possible approach to designing the digital future. The first consideration we need to have is, what is our digital vision? What is the digital vision for what education may look like in the future? How will teachers teach? How will students learn? How will parents participate in that learning experience? What will the classroom of the future look like? We need to understand within the context of each of the user stories, the teacher's story, the different cohorts of students' story, the parent's story, the principal's story, the education support worker's story, and what will their journey look like in this future world. From that, we can create the digital blueprint, the blueprint that is the reference model and the architecture for how this will look like. Not just the technology, but the architecture of the educational environment. How will a school operate? How will this all connect? And most importantly, what will the capabilities be that are needed to deliver to this? The digital blueprint can then inform the roadmap and the initiatives that we need to undertake to deliver on the digital vision. Whatever the digital vision may be, we do know that there are certain things that are enablers of digital, no matter what that vision may be. We need to have the right technology architecture in place, an architecture that is like building blocks that we can plug and play, or a composable architecture in Gartner's terms. We need an operating model that brings together the educators, the technologists, all of the people who can realise this vision. We need to examine our delivery practices, not just for delivery of technology, but also the delivery of educational services. They need to be agile, flexible, responsive. And we need to have a culture that is collaborative, that brings together all of the parties that can impact on a student's experience in education. Most of all, we need to have the data. I want to talk a little bit now about the data, and to talk about the education data ecosystem and what that looks like. We capture an incredible amount of data through our student information systems, our learning management systems, our assessment systems, other school administration systems, and the subject-specific applications that a teacher may use in the classroom, depending on the subject they may be teaching. We also have ubiquitous capture of data through the very devices that we use, that our students use, the networks they're connecting to, the network monitoring that we do to optimise our operations or to make sure that we're aware of any cybersecurity attacks, and the security cameras that are on school grounds to keep students safe when they're in the school environment. And it's all in the cloud. The digital era has brought about an explosion of data. Data in itself, or islands of data, are meaningless. It's only when the data comes together and it's provided within some context that it becomes meaningful information. There are really some good examples of information being used well in the education sector. Many jurisdictions now are using data to highlight when a student may be at risk of either leaving the education system or not reaching their full potential. So intervention can happen. There are many examples of universities over a number of years now who've been using location-based data that tells them where students are learning. They're no longer coming to lecture theatres. So where are they consuming lectures? Are they on campus? Are they off campus? If they're on campus, are they in social spaces such as cafes? This information informs a university as to where they need to invest. If students are not coming to lecture theatres, it's pointless building more lecture theatres. However, if they're congregating in social spaces such as cafes or the library, maybe it's time to invest more in those types of spaces. And if they're learning at home, maybe there's time to invest in more compelling digital content for students. We really do have a complex data ecosystem, and bringing it together is no easy task. Is this a real problem that is so complex? Knowing that each individual data set only tells a very, very small part of the picture, I would say that it probably is a problem. We need to bring this data together to tell the full story of what a student's experience is like. We need to look at the data from early childhood, from prep to 12 or K to 12, from post-secondary, and we need to look at all of the data about different elements of a child's life to really understand what we call the 360 degree of student. There is not a lot of connection between the systems used in early childhood, K to 12 and post-secondary. How can we build those connections so that we truly understand what that might be like? How do we know that a child who took part in a program in early childhood education where this program has had a positive impact on their K to 12 or post-secondary education? And how do we know whether our programs are effective, and how do we know what needs to be adjusted to make them more effective? Obviously, moving to a more digital world in the classroom means fundamental change the way things have been done for many, many years. How do we make that change? A lot of people feel quite afraid of when we talk about transformation, large transformation programs. If we think about those organisations that have been most successful in the digital era, most of them have been born digital. If we use the usual sort of examples of Uber, Airbnb, etc., they weren't hampered by having legacy technology systems, legacy processes, and they didn't have people who worked there who only knew the old way of doing things. They could totally reimagine how to achieve the outcome they wanted to achieve. If we think about that in education terms, how can we reimagine education for the future without thinking about the legacy that we currently have? I believe we need to establish innovation hubs to test and try, to understand how effectively to use digital in the classroom, how we can use digital that really does have an impact on a student's outcomes, to bring together the people, the educators, the technologists, the futurists, all of the people who can have an input to this. And then over time, bring that back into our education system. I have a little bit of a story to tell about how difficult change is for some. University that I used to work at, they were establishing, rather than formal lecture theatres, establishing a lot more collaborative learning spaces. The learning spaces had no front of room. So there was no place where the lecturer stood at the front of the room and lectured to the students. They were very fluid in their design. But what we found was that some of the lecturers were not comfortable with that. They would rechange the room so that the desks were all lined up in a line, and they actually created a front of room because that was what they were familiar with. we really need to take away our thinking of how things have been done in the past to really free ourselves to imagine how it may be in the future. The last thing I want to mention is safety. With the exposure of data and the use of the different technologies that I've mentioned today, these all have the ability to have a hugely positive impact on a student's life and the outcomes for our students. However, they also have the ability to be harmful. When we establish a digital identity for a child, this is pervasive, and a digital identity is not something that you can easily get rid of. So we need to be conscious of this. We need to be conscious of public opinion about the use of such technologies as facial recognition, particularly for young children. You would have to consider whether marking the role is something that should be automated through the use of facial recognition and artificial intelligence. Or is role marking, particularly for younger students, an opportunity for the teacher to gauge how a child might be feeling as they come into the classroom, not just a simple process? We need to understand that there is an ethical application of some of these technologies. We need to be careful that we don't build in algorithms that have bias. There are some well-known examples about how surveillance has been used in artificial intelligence to judge a person's ethnicity, which have proven to be largely inaccurate. The Australian Human Rights Commission has recently released a report regarding the use of technology, the benefits of the use of technology, but also some of the risks. It's very well worth reading, and I really encourage you to go to the Australian Human Rights Commission's website to access the report and have a read. Thank you for listening today. I hope I've managed to have you thinking about not only the things that we can do with technology, but also the caution and the policies and the standards that we need to put in place to make sure that we keep our students achieving in an equitable way their potential, but also not to create any harm for them. Thank you.